Welcome into another episode of The Install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. We are now heading into week 8 of the NFL. Greg, some teams starting to make some moves a couple of weeks before the trade deadline. Literally, as we sat down to record the podcast, the Philadelphia Eagles, undefeated on the season, just sent a 4th rounder to the Chicago Bears for the pass rusher, Robert Quinn.
You know, things are buzzing in Philly. Obviously, the Phillies are in the World Series. The Eagles are making moves, and they're undefeated going into the 8th week of the NFL season. They obviously felt that they needed more from their pass rush, which I think has been pretty good. But Robert Quinn is coming off a season in which he set the Bears record for quarterback sacks. He's now going to a team where he does not have to play 65 or 70 snaps a game at age 33, Buck. He can probably be a 35 snap a game player, maybe even 30, and be a really impactful player because Robert Quinn could always rush the quarterback. That's his deal. He can do that. He's bendy, he's flexible, he's explosive. So he's going to a team that is obviously in the hunt, being the only undefeated team, and just continuing to load up.
The rich get richer, it would seem. And a 4th rounder is the compensation, Greg. It just, I know we're not here to do like the Jimmy Johnson chart or whatever, but it's not anything crazy for the talent that this guy would provide. I guess my question, and you may not have the answer for this, but as far as the Philadelphia front goes, like whose snaps would he be taking away
That's
from?
That's a great question. Point? That's a great question because the Eagles, when they play their nickel, they tend to play either a 4-2 front and keep 2 linebackers on the field or a 5-1 front in which they have 5 defensive linemen. Now, they could also be thinking in terms of, what people call a NASCAR front or a cheetah front, where they, in a sense, play 4 edge rushers on their defensive line. Teams have done that through the years, and they just bring 2 of them inside at tackle, and they get speed versus guards and centers. And we know that guards and centers often do not fare well against speed and athleticism and explosiveness. So they could be thinking along those lines. Look, this goes back a number of years when the Giants in the Super Bowl would bring, Justin Tuck inside, and he would rush in the Super Bowl against the Patriots, I believe in 2007, and he would rush inside against guards, and he was a load to handle. So now all of a sudden you can think in those terms, possibly. But look, there's a couple of positions in this league, as you know, where every team would tell you you never have enough. And the 2 positions on defense are pass rusher and corner. You never have enough pass rushers and you never have enough corners. So, teams that are striving for a Super Bowl, which theoretically all teams are, obviously, but the Eagles are one of those teams that seem, particularly in good position to be one of those realistic options to do so. They added a pass rusher. And like I said, you never have enough.
So we haven't talked, at least on our podcast, and I'm sure you've talked about the Eagles a great deal, but what they are doing offensively and how Nick Sirianni and that offensive coaching staff have helped kind of transition from what was the league's best rushing attack last season into a really, really well-executed passing game to complement the rushing abilities.
Which is still really good, by the way, the rushing game
that this personnel group has. So what observations have you seen for people who may not necessarily have caught an Eagles game outside of SportsCenter highlights? What have you seen from them so far?
Well, I think there's 2 things I would say. Can be more than that, but for the purpose of this, 2 things. Number one, I think the coaching staff does an outstanding job game planning for each specific opponent. And I think that's the goal. Now, every team has a certain foundation, okay? That you have to start with that because you have to coach somewhere. You don't coach by just doing 1,000 things. So you have to have a foundation. But I think within that foundation, they do an outstanding job of playing against each specific opponent with what they do. And the other point I'd make is, as much as we've seen their pass game be expansive at times this year, the last 2 games they've played, when they got into the 4th quarter against the Cardinals and the Cowboys, and they needed a must drive, they ran the ball. Against Arizona, they had a 17-play drive in the 4th quarter to basically ice the game. 13 of those 17 plays were called runs.
Wow.
Against the Cowboys, when they needed the same to ice the game, they had a 13-play drive. 9 of the 13 plays were called runs. So when they need to run the ball, they can line up and run the ball. Now, Hurts is a factor in the run game, obviously, but the point is they're called runs.
So we'll have more time to talk about the Eagles because the Titans will go to Philadelphia in December. Certainly.
Oh, so will you be here, Buck?
I will be in Philly. We should do dinner or something, Greg.
Well, you might, if it's December, who knows? You might need a nice winter jacket.
Yeah, it's a different kind of cold up there that time of year. Than it is, where I'm putting on a coat today when it's 75 degrees.
You probably think, in Nashville when it hits 55 that it's really cold.
Buddy, I've only gotten softer since trekking.
Since your days in Bloomington, right?
That's exactly right. About negative 12 and 3 feet of snow. I don't miss that at all. I'm much happier down here. But anyway, the Eagles will host the Pittsburgh Steelers this week coming off the bye. So we'll see how much Robert Quinn factors in for them on Sunday. Greg, you talk about foundation of a team's offense. That's certainly the case here with Derrick Henry and the Tennessee Titans. The offense is a thing that we have talked about ad nauseum. This week they did it. They won without an offensive touchdown being scored. And Ryan Tannehill gets hurt in the process. But what were your what did you see from Derrick Henry in this game? And then we'll talk about the Titans offense as a whole.
Yeah, well, again, this is something where I wish I had a hotline right to Mike Vrabel or Todd Downing, and they would answer me in a second. But they went really heavy in this game with base personnel through the first. Their record is now what, 4-2?
They're 4-2. Yeah.
Okay, so through the first 5 games of the season, they'd been about 50% with 11 personnel, which means the other 50% were some kind of base personnel. This game, they were close to 70% playing with base personnel, meaning 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends, the fullback, so they obviously did that for a reason.
Yeah.
I can't say what the specific reason is. They obviously know because they did it. And no coaches in the NFL do things on a whim. So they really went heavy. And they wanted to run the ball clearly. But I will say this. The fourth quarter, Derrick Henry had 11 rushes for 67 yards. 11 out of his 30 carries came in the fourth quarter. What they did best in this game as an offensive line were the double team blocks inside. They struggled with one-on-one blocks, but when they had those double teams inside, some like to call that duo. Others call it different coaches call it different things. But that's when they were at their absolute best in this game, Buck, when they ran the ball with duo. And they could double the 2 D tackles and work up to the linebackers. That really helped Radens. That really helped Brewer, because Radens and Brewer at times struggle mightily with one-on-one blocks. And the double teaming really helps them get their footing and really helps them become players you can line up with and run the football.
Yeah, it felt at least as a unit, it looked as effective a rushing performance collectively as they'd had. And I thought the coaching staff really leaned into that. That was certainly something. We see them repping that on a regular basis, whether it's with a guard and a tackle, whether it's a tackle and a tight end, how they work their second level blocking systems. It's something that they rep out obviously every day, as most teams do.
I also thought, it was interesting on Henry's 23-yard run in the second quarter. I thought it was really interesting because Ben Jones had a phenomenal reach block on the nose shade, but Stewart was not in the game then. It was Coward. So I'm not saying he wouldn't have done it on Stewart. We have no idea. But it was a phenomenal reach block by Jones. And on that play, there was an excellent second level movement block by the left guard Brewer on Okereke. So that was a really sweet run too, which was an outside zone run, not a duo run inside. But that was a really well executed run.
Yeah, we haven't seen a lot of when Derrick starts to get 5 yards, 6 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, you see the people in the stadium start to rise. So it felt like there was a little more juice in Nissan Stadium getting ready for one of those, and then he'd get shoestring tackled.
And Henry has not had the long runs this year. We'll see if they're coming. We don't know that. But I thought he had 30 carries in this game, and the yards were hard earned, Buck. This was a really good game for Derrick Henry, even though he did not break the long one that over the last 3-4 years we've become accustomed to. But I thought he it was a game that demanded. Look, they got ahead on the. And we'll talk about their defense in a moment. They got ahead on the interception. That put them ahead by, I think, was it 10-0 at the time that put them ahead?
That was 10-0 at the time. Yes.
And I guess they did get to 13-7 to make it a one-score game, but for the most part, the game had the feel of the Titans being in control. So it was definitely a Derrick Henry game. And when you get the ball 30 times, you're not going to have 30 phenomenal runs. It doesn't work like that in the NFL. You need to get hard yards, and he got hard yards in this game.
It's just so grueling, Greg, on,
Yeah.
and we know what Derek is. We know what Derek's capable of. Obviously, they're using the best thing that they have at their advantage right now because the wide receiver core is completely depleted. They put Kyle Phillips on injured reserve yesterday, so he's going to miss 4 games. They bring Chris Conley in, who, has had a decent NFL career, but hasn't, that's not team speed, the kind of thing we've talked about for them all year long. And they're having to do things like running Malik Willis on a jet sweep because they don't have any other way to get creative as far as the explosive or even chunk plays are concerned. So we can't say that it's not sustainable, or I can't ask you if it's sustainable, because clearly something about this is sustainable. It's just crazy to me that
the larger question is this. Look, I looked at their schedule when I finished watching their tape, a half hour or so ago, and their schedule is such that they could easily be at, a 12-5 team or 11-6. I mean, the schedule lays out that way. The way in which they play now, they can beat a lot of teams on their schedule.
Yeah.
Obviously, when they go to Kansas City, and we'll discuss that next week. But the question is, and we'll discuss it in more detail next week. The question is, can they beat? I mean, they already played Buffalo. Okay, now granted, some might say, hey, take a mulligan on that because of all the injuries in the secondary. But the point is, Josh Allen and the Bills tend to score on pretty much everybody. So are they going to beat the Bills in a 1916 game, or are they going to have to put up points? And I think right now the question would be, can this offense put up the necessary points? And I think that's a legitimate question. It's not it's not a rip. It's just a statement of fact. That would be a question. Don't you think that's a very fair question when you look at this team?
Every day, every day, Greg. It's the question I ask myself, is it going to look any differently today? Are they going to find this source of, even just to sustain drives, because it's been so hard for them to sustain drives. And, obviously, as you mentioned, the offensive line injuries are something that they're having to account for. Now, Tannehill, he wasn't in a walking boot today, and he was limited in practice, but we'll see how that goes, because obviously that would be hugely detrimental to them at this point. Well, let's talk about the Titans on defense, Greg, because the notable personnel changes for them. Amani Hooker and Bud Dupree both returning. Amani Hooker played in the nickel for them, and they kept Andrew Adams, who had the pick 6, as the safety opposite Kevin Byard. What did you notice about the way that they played their defensive snaps this week?
I mean, they played no snaps of base defense. They played 44 snaps of nickel, of which probably 41 or 42 of them were what I have always called big nickel, with 3 safeties. And keep in mind, the Colts played every snap with 3 wide receivers on the field. So they were totally comfortable with Amani Hooker playing over the slot. Now, they didn't play a ton of man, but they did play some man where he had to match up to wide receivers. In fact, he was matched up on Campbell when they scored the touchdown. And there were a couple of other times he was matched up man-to-man on wide receivers. But basically, their base defense in this game was big nickel with 3 safeties. So somewhere in game plan preparation last week, when the coaches got together and talked about, hey, what do we want to do? They decided this is what we're going to do, because they have not done that this year. They have not played big nickel as any kind of meaningful personnel foundation at all, and that was clearly their foundation. They only played, I think, 2 or 3 snaps of conventional nickel, meaning 3 corners and 2 safeties, and the rest of the snaps were dime, and in dime they would bring McCrary inside, and on the outside they had Mitchell, the corner. He'd play, Fulton was the boundary corner, and in both base and sub, and McCrary was the field corner in base, and he would come inside, and then Mitchell was the field corner in dime.
It's been the most successful secondary combination that they've had so far this season, Greg, because for the first time so far through these first, I guess, 6 games for them, they did not allow. They allowed one play of 20 yards. One play of 20 yards throughout the course of this. They've had these big, explosive plays in less than ideal spots that have allowed opponents to get back in the game, even though the Titans are able to hang on in red zone defense. But it really seemed like what they did was their best matchup advantage and helped limit the explosive plays that they've been wanting to give up.
Yeah, and of course they were playing the Colts, and we know.
Oh yeah, that
Matt
matters
Ryan
too.
has now been benched, and Matt Ryan has clearly lost arm strength, and he didn't have any arm strength to lose. But it's clearly now below the level at which you can really be a quality NFL starter, and I'm sure that's the reason he was benched. Which is, you hate to see that, because Matt Ryan has had a career that is a notch below a Hall of Fame career. And by the way, if he'd won that Super Bowl, against the Patriots when they were up 28-3, many would probably say he is a Hall of Famer. So it's a shame when you see that. My guess is he'll handle this with the same class that he's handled everything else as an NFL quarterback. But it's just, you hate to see that kind of stuff. But this is the reality of the league. He's probably not probably. There's certain things he just cannot do that you need to do as an NFL quarterback.
Right. And certainly Jeff Simmons and T.R. Tart and Bud Dupree and the rest of them weren't making his life any easier this past Sunday. So with I know Mahomes and the Chiefs are yet another week ahead for the Titans, Greg, but you mentioned him playing like, the Michael Jordan of football right now. He's been unbelievable, the level of efficiency. And they played against a mostly healthy San Francisco defense and just rolled them over. What did you take away from that matchup?
I mean, I got to tell you, I thought Mahomes was high level efficient.
So
and keep
good.
one thing in mind, he did not run around a lot in this game.
Right.
There were not a lot of his off-platform trick shot throws. Which he's the best in the league at, but he played from the pocket, which he's more than capable of doing. That's why he's Mahomes, is he can play from the pocket. At some point, to be a great quarterback in this league, and he is a great quarterback, you've got to play from the pocket. And he was high level efficiency in the pocket, throwing with timing, precise ball location. It was one of those games. He saw it. He tends to see it pretty much all the time, but he saw it cleanly. He delivered the football. It was, I also do San Francisco radio, and I was talking to those guys, last night, and that's what we were saying. It's just one of those games that I brought up Michael Jordan. Sometimes guys play at that level, and unless you can sack them and hit them a lot, and he was getting the ball out so quick, within rhythm, within timing, you couldn't hit him, and it was beautiful to watch.
Absolutely.
A great quarterback playing at a high level.
It's and just the way that Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy and their offensive staff, it's just such a creative way that they maximize that efficiency even further in the way, especially when they get inside of 20 yards. It's just beyond the otherworldly talent that he obviously possesses. It's just such an entertaining watch for fans of creative football.
Yeah, and I'm probably old school, Buck. Obviously he's fun to watch when he runs around, but I can appreciate more, just maybe due to my background and who's taught me the position. When I see guys playing at a really high level from the pocket like that, that to me is just that's a work of art. I just love watching that.
Well, and it's I don't want to say that it's just a certain kind of discipline, I imagine, especially from somebody, as you mentioned, with your background, who's learned from a lot of coaches and specifically about the quarterback position. Like, you understand the discipline that it takes to play and kind of settle in that way, rather than just, trying to make really these frenetic plays that he's incredible at too.
Yeah. It's really hard. That's the thing. It's really hard. And when I watch a quarterback, and Mahomes was the perfect example this week, who plays with such discipline, nuance, subtlety, it's that to me is that works for me more than watching a guy run around. I know watching a guy run around is exciting, but I like the more subtle nature of the position, the disciplined craft nature of the position. And, Mahomes is more than capable of playing like that any given week, clearly.
Yeah, they're off this week on a bye, as are the Chargers. Greg, the NFL matchup show, of course, always available for people to get smarter about what it is that they're seeing on Sundays about teams throughout the course of the week. ESPN Plus, you can catch it on ESPN. Set your DVRs. Make sure you don't miss a minute of the great breakdowns that Greg and Darius Butler are doing. I took a guess at a game that was on the board this week. Tell me if I'm wrong. Jets Patriots. Does that make the show?
It's not, for this reason. We don't know who's going to play quarterback for the Patriots. Now, we'll probably know by the time we shoot, but as you know, being in the business, Buck, we have to pre-produce pieces, film pieces. We can't pre-produce a film piece 5 minutes before we go on the set.
Right.
So, and the Jets have been in our show the last 3 weeks, and quite frankly, they just played Brett Rippon and they won, and Zach Wilson was not very good. Zach Wilson is going to be an interesting case study as this year continues because he's very frenetic. We just spoke about Mahomes. And by the way, Zach Wilson is a live-armed, easy thrower, looks beautiful throwing it. He's got light, athletic feet. He's got a lot of traits you look at and say, I'd like to mold those traits. But right now, he's reckless, he's undisciplined, he's chaotic, he's frenetic, he doesn't see it. Every throw is 100 miles an hour. He has a ways to go. And could a light go on and could he, be good in 3 weeks? Sure. Because you never know with that stuff. But the point I'm making is that's the reason we're not putting that game in the show. So we're actually putting a game in the show between two teams with losing records, but in some ways it's fascinating. We're doing the Raiders at Saints for this reason. Over the last 3 games, Josh Jacobs' numbers have been phenomenal.
Right.
Absolutely phenomenal.
He's been playing like a man possessed out there.
He's had 28 for 144, 21 for 154, and 20 for 143 in the last 3 games. And that's the way McDaniels has reset their offense. And if you look ahead to their schedule, look, no games are easy, but they're in a situation where they could get it rolling a little bit. And, Jacobs he's run really well. And it's interesting because they brought the fullback from New England to Las Vegas because obviously Josh McDaniels knows him. And over these last 3 games, the fullback's snaps have increased pretty significantly, and they're running the ball with the fullback on the field quite a bit.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, because I've seen a little bit of the Raiders. Obviously, they played the Titans earlier in the season. I haven't seen much of them since, but they've been kind of tinkering with that offensive line throughout the course of the season too. Correct?
Yeah, they move people around. They have a rookie from Memphis, Dylan Parham, who played center. Now he seems to be settled in at guard. I think he's going to be a really good player, by the way. So James is
stud
back
at the Senior Bowl.
What's that?
He was a stud at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, I loved his tape too. I thought he'd be a really good player when I watched his college tape. And I think maybe they settled on what their O-line should look like, and if those guys can stay healthy and play. But I just thought with what Jacobs has done the last 3 games, unless you're talking Derrick Henry, who hasn't quite done that this year, but not a lot of backs do that in the NFL. So I just thought that was something to take a look at.
Well, it'll definitely be worth listening to Greg and Darius break it down on the NFL Matchup Show this weekend. Greg, I'm looking forward to going to Houston. We'll see what happens with the Titans, and certainly we'll be back after Week 8 to talk about another great slate of NFL football.
All right, Buck. Yeah, that was fun. We'll see what happens with those Titans.
Yeah, every week. I'm just looking for a touchdown, Greg. Just one.
There you go.
See
you and
buddy.
Thursday Night Football for a while.
Yeah, it might be a little while.
Yeah.